American Secession, The Looming Threat of a National Breakup by F. H. Buckley. Chapter 12, Everything That Rises Must Converge. So this is it. This is the last chapter of the book on our journey. It's very small. It's a very small chapter, a couple of highlights just to go over. One thing that is said as a declarative statement is the barriers to secession are weak, but the case for breakup is strong. He notes that secession movements rarely gain traction. Calexit, Texas secession, all of them. They rarely get over 50% support in the population. And there's a reason for this. The federal system in the United States, while it is very oppressive in terms of its overreach, the idea of seceding is exceptionally appealing. So there's a mental support for it. However, the federal system is also very, very large and oppressive. And so the footprint of the federal system on the lives of people to make the case of seceding makes it significantly harder. Case in point, in 1861, when legislatures across the South decided to leave, and they voted to leave by democratic process, there was a thought that there was not really much to leave here. The federal government was small. There were only, according to the Federal Register, 36,672 federal jobs nationwide, and the post office accounted for 4/6 of those jobs. Today, the picture is quite different. There are approximately 2 million federal jobs. The footprint of federal activity is much greater. Federal aid, quote unquote, is a big part of the state budgets. We take a lot of money from states and redistribute it. You may remember earlier in the book, we talked a little bit about California sending much, much more out than they receive back, which is why California has had a movement to secede. We've come, unfortunately, to expect so much from the federal government. The expanse of it, the footprint of it, the role, the expectations is just greater. He used the case in point of Katrina, the storm that ravaged New Orleans back probably now 12 years ago. There was an incompetent mayor, a governor that didn't really respond very well, but the federal president, George W. Bush, really got hammered with criticism about whether or not it was handled properly. And like it or not, today our national economy is much more interlinked with each other than we are even with foreign entities. So it's a very, very different scenario today than it was back in 1861 when legislatures voted to secede. And then, of course, this leads to the point of which state, if they were to decide to do this, would go first. Would it be California? Would it be somebody else? And if that happened, what would be the consequences of that? An earlier chapter talked about what that would actually look like. Like it or not, Buckley says, America is most likely going to stay as it is. It has become the world's policeman. And when countries get in trouble, your country gets invaded. Charles Krauthammer was very famously noted as saying, who do you call? You call America. And America comes in with the big guns. The presidency of Donald Trump challenged that with the statement America First, which of course has a double meaning. You can interpret those two words, America First, as a realization that we need to be a little bit more realistic about our exploits abroad, that we really actually need to retreat from the world and focus more in on ourselves. That's one interpretation. However, a person could hear the words America First and have a very different interpretation. It could be perceived as America should seek glory in the world, that America should have the greatest economy, the best universities, the strongest military to do the things that are needed to do in the larger world. And so one has to ask, does a person who voted for Trump, as an example, which version of America First do they see? Chances are it might be the second one. Chances are. So they might be very unlikely to vote, by a process for dissolution of America, because there is this myth, there's this ethos that America is great, strongest military, greatest ever, and why would we want to change it? In fact, we want to increase that. That is very much an indicator that it's unlikely that America would, by a legislative process, be brought down low. But Buckley actually says it is, it could happen. We can even see that here, as I record this in 2021, there's been a lot of problems. We have exponential spending, trillions and trillions of dollars, devaluation of our currency, lots of social problems going on related to race, immigration, the economy. Yes, markets are doing well as I record this for the most part, but that really shouldn't be happening given the amount of unemployment that we have. Something is going to give. And people that put secession out of their mind, thinking that it will never happen here, are really fooling themselves, Buckley argues. The next question in the remaining paragraphs was, well, if this were to happen, how would it happen? He seems to like the idea of home rule that we discussed earlier in the chapter. His final paragraphs were really related to, for starters, we need to become more tolerant of each other in our differences of opinion, without really offering a mode of how that would actually happen, other than we all decide to just get along. He did mention that progressives are waging a permanent culture war on conservatives. Some have said that the conservatives lost the culture war long ago. The example he gave is that in 2010, when the Marriage Equality Act went through the Supreme Court, what was or could have been seen as a really just triumphant victory turned into the stepping stone for the next battle, which is transgendered rights, where people are pursuing that with equal vigor and enthusiasm and constantly calling conservatives sort of racists and intolerant. And his last statement is that he admits he's a unionist. Okay, I was a little surprised by that. Basically just sees that a smaller government would be good. The final analysis, I would say, of this chapter is it really just ends in a dud, from my reading of it. This book in general made a case, a pretty strong case based on data for secession, and it gave some paths to do that. In the end, the author decides to state to his reader that he's a unionist, that it actually is working, which seems to be at direct opposition to what the case has been making, but says that the union that we have should just be smaller. How we get there, no real guidance, insight, nothing. So I actually have to admit that I really am a little bit disappointed by the final chapter of this book. The book as a whole, I think, made some really great points, a really great historical analysis, and is worthy of a read. Probably the person listening to this has listened to these chapters as just a quick shortcut just to see if they get the gist. And that's okay. That's fine. I've tried to be fair to the arguments presented all the way along, whether I agree with them or not, and just simply convey what the substance of the book is. I have to say the ending, in my humble opinion, left a lot to be desired. But we're at the end of the journey, and the mission is accomplished from that perspective. So I really want to thank everyone who has come through the chapters with me. It's been fun to dive into them and explore these ideas. From my own observation, I am a big believer that the United States government as we know it is unsustainable and will at some point collapse under its own weight. It has to. There's historical precedent. There's no reason to believe that it would not happen. And the simple fact of the economic breakdown is a good indicator of that, let alone the cultural thing. So we may not have a de jure secession, in other words, by a court or by a legislature, but we may have a de facto secession, which I'm really hoping for. At a minimum, I hope that states reassert their rights and simply ignore the Washington behemoth. But things like agencies like the IRS, the CDC, just all of the three-letter agencies that have become so obtrusive, really, there's not much place for them. So Give the book a read if you have some time. Get it from the library if you don't want to buy it, and see if you come to the same conclusions. As always, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel and leave comments, as it really helps me see that I'm providing some good information, and of course it helps with the algorithm to serve up this content to people that might be looking for it. So thank you for your engagement and your interest, and I look forward to seeing you out there.